Howdy, and welcome to episode 3 of the FloridaMan40k podcast. I'm John Lennon, and I'm here with Daniel Smith.
Yeah, that's
and
me.
Jimmy Prescott.
That is me, yeah.
Daddy's home.
Oof. Am I daddy?
I think this weekend I'm daddy.
Shit.
Alright, guys, so we're here to talk about a couple things. We're going to be talking about the previewed Space Marine rules from Games Workshop and how we're all Imperium players now. And then we're going to talk about our little 5-minute meta and review the Super Secret GT that went on this weekend. And then we're going to close things off by talking about the mindset for competitive 40k and how you prepare to win. You guys excited?
I'm down for it. I'm ready to go.
Been looking forward to it for a week and a half, yes.
A week and a half. We are recording a couple days late, which means we're releasing it a couple days late because that's how editing works.
Yeah.
It's true. And I'm trying to think who we want to blame on this. Probably me.
Jimmy.
And Jimmy.
Why me?
Because you're the editor.
Oh, dang it.
You should have started editing this on Tuesday.
Oh, no.
Alright, so starting things off, new Space Marines. Have you guys caught up, read the new stuff?
I've read a bit.
Read a little bit?
I have not because I play Chaos. And it directly affects me in every way.
You could just clip off the spikes for once.
I mean,
True.
I don't like getting snipped.
You can run Alpha Legion as pretty much any of those chapters, and I think people will approve.
Yeah, and I've got my 30k Alpha Legion, so like it's literally perfect.
Mm-hmm. So what we've seen so far is they've previewed all of the original founding chapter tactics. They've showed off some of the kind of secondary founding chapter tactics that you're going to get to pick, which to me is crazy that you're going to be able to pick your own chapter tactics again. That's kind of a throwback to a couple editions ago, actually. They've previewed some of the new units, and they have gone over some of the new rules for the Ultramarine, not index supplement, I don't know what they're going to call it yet, but it's like a codex supplement of Ultramarines, but you also have to buy the normal Space Marine codex, I think. I don't know. So far it looks like an upgrade. Space Marines are kind of generally acknowledged to be pretty trash right now, other than occasionally sneaking in some Storm Shields. But, oof, these new rules... It looks like they're basically making them, from my perception at least, an anti-trick army, where all of the tricks that people use to beat a straightforward army like Marines are suddenly not going to work. As a Change Cult player, I am terrified.
Yeah, because we already got the, I don't remember what they're called, the scouts that prevent you from deep striking within 12 inches. Mm-hmm. And it's like they're just layering more of that into the army. So you can't come in within 12 inches. I just drew a blank. Sorry.
Wait, is that a thing? They can't deep strike within 12 inches?
So the Infiltrator was in the Shadow Spear box, and it's getting its own standalone kit. You cannot deep strike within 12 inches of it instead of 9 inches. However, since this is a special rule, it also gets around the closer than 9-inch deep strikes, such as Lying in Wait for Dream Circle. Can't be used to get around it because it's an ability instead of the regular game limitation. And it's a combo kit, and they've already covered that the other unit in it, I'm blanking on the name of that, will also have the 12-inch no-go aura, as well as I think they ignore negatives to hit, which I don't play Eldar, so that makes me happy.
Yeah, and that's another thing I did see is they're starting to make changes to armies with negatives to hit anyway. So Raven Guard now is going to count as being in cover even when they're not, and then non-vehicle units that are in cover will then get the -1 to hit if they're outside of 12 inches. So you still have access to that, but they are making that change, which I think is just healthy for the game in general. And if you read into it a little bit, and they've confirmed this and other things, they state non-vehicle units, which implies that vehicles are going to be benefiting from your chapter tactics now. So instead of just like Eldar and the other cheese armies, now Marines and hopefully Chaos Marines, because that's what I care about, are going to benefit from chapter tactics as well.
They did actually confirm in a separate article that vehicles will indeed be benefiting from chapter tactics. Specifically, they used like the Ultramarine tanks as an example, so a Predator will now be able to fall back from combat and still shoot.
And then some of the Ultramarines, I don't know how the tactical abilities work if you have to have a character within a certain limit, but they can move and shoot heavy weapons as though they didn't move. Would that also apply for vehicles?
Yes, it will. So that's... it's a lot here. So what they unveiled was Doctrines, Devastator, Tactical, and Assault. And this is for all Space Marines, not just Ultramarines. So basically, if your Devastator Doctrines are up, It's kind of like a canticle, or where it starts off the game as one, and then you can change it as the game goes on, but you can never go back to the original one. So you start off with Devastator Doctrine. As long as Devastator Doctrine's up, you get -1 AP to your heavy weapons and your grenade weapons. So you think turn 1, you stand still and shoot. All your las cannons are -4, your heavy bolters are -2. Every single gun on the repulsor is now AP -2. It's absolutely disgusting. Tactical Doctrine takes that to assault weapons, rapid fire weapons, and assault will take that to melee weapons and pistol weapons. So you're kind of working through the sequence as your army is moving forward. Starting off, your shooting weapons are more deadly, then your close range weapons, then your melee weapons as you finish off the opponent. So it looks really fun to me. You kind of get to choose when you switch from one doctrine to another, but once you do, there's no going back. You just have to work your way through the progression.
Now, do those have to change every turn, or can you just start with one and just play that the whole game?
It doesn't have to change. It starts the one as Devastator, and then I think at the beginning of any player turn, then you can change it, or any of your player turns you can change it. And then, as Jimmy mentioned, with Ultramarines, I think you've got that up. I don't know if you want to read that to us.
Yeah, so there's a power called Scions of Gilliman.
Mm-hmm.
Gilliman? How do you pronounce his name?
Girlyman is the technical pronunciation.
So, Scions of Girlyman. While this tactical doctrine is active, models with this ability that moved in your movement phase but did not advance or fall back can make attacks with ranged weapons in the following shooting phase as if their unit had remained stationary this turn. So it specifically says this while this tactical doctrine is active, it's a handy advantage when moving squads or vehicles armed with heavy weapons. And it's also working well in conjunction with Bolter Discipline because it counts you as not having moved.
Yeah. So that means your intercessors are always getting their 2 shots, even at 30-inch range, even on the move. And if they're using the Vigilist detachment buff and the stratagem, that means the rapid fire 2 getting 4 shots no matter how far they moved.
So what I think is just super cool about that is one of the big draws lately, since Bolter Discipline came out, was Space Marine bikes, Chaos Space Marine bikes, which we haven't seen a lot on top tables. We did, I think, last week and the week before. But Terminators as well, with Storm Bolters or Combi Bolters of your Chaos. The ability, even though they're slow platform, to move and still get 4 shots per dude, you put buffs on them and everything, your Bolters are pretty efficient.
So actually, Terminators and bikes already got that for Bolter Drill.
That's literally my point. That's what made them good.
Yeah. Yes, now that goes.
Now that's on literally everything.
Oh, okay, I see your point.
That was the point.
So the question is, does that now go back and invalidate those units?
Oh, absolutely. It makes the cheaper Marine so much better now because unless you need the 2 wound, 2 up save of a Terminator, which you can now kind of get with Raven Guard. Mm-hmm. Always being in cover on a Primaris Marine is now a 2 up save, 2 wounds. So like
fair. I think this is the death of the tactical Marine. Like no one was really using them, and everyone was already using Primaris, but the Primaris just get the buffs that they previewed so far so much more efficiently with so much better guns. Sell your small Marines now. There's no need to play with manlets. Or they're done.
Just convert them to Deathwatch.
Yeah, convert them to Deathwatch.
Because that's the only time you're going to play them.
Or Grey Knights.
Okay, so only Deathwatch.
Yeah, so only Deathwatch. Good call.
But it does feel a little better in that way because the Primaris Marine was built to be a better warrior. And that was pretty recent lore anyway, right? So, like, when they came out and nobody used them because gaining a wound wasn't really beneficial because a lot of the good weapons that would get through armor would also deal more than one wound anyway. Mm-hmm. Having a reason to play the actual superior Marine now feels a little bit more fluffy, but still competitive at the same time.
Yeah, it is a competitive army that fits the fluff. I'm sure a lot of people will enjoy that greatly.
Cass.
Mostly Cass.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the new Marine stuff looks great. So far, it doesn't look like they're gaining many durability boosts. They're getting the new Impulsor, which is a flying rhino of indeterminate points cost. Yep. And they previewed that can get a 4-up invulnerable save. We're kind of going to have to see how points shake out on that one. Yeah. If it's as cheap as a Chimera, it's awesome. If it's the same points as a Wave Serpent, well, it's not a Wave Serpent, so it's bad. Mm-hmm. So we'll kind of have to wait and see on that one, but definitely has the potential to be very, very useful.
Do we know, is that going to be a dual kit? Because that was one of the big things I liked about the AdMech tanks, was you have the transport option, but the Scorpius ended up being great.
As far as I can tell, they have not previewed anything for the Impulsor besides the Impulsor. That makes me assume that it's a single kit. It does have a couple options. It looked like it had like a Skyfire turret you could put on top, a comms relay to call in an orbital bombardment, the shield generator I just mentioned, and you can probably just take it naked. But I think that's the only model in the kit, but it sounds like it's going to at least have some options to change things up.
While you said that, though, the whole comms array thing, that tendency in new rules is starting to, well, maybe not even new rules, but rules that are coming into play more often is perturbing to me. I want to get your guys' opinion. So when we moved into 8th edition, they moved away from templates and things that did area of effect. At the beginning of 8th edition, there was no area of effect. There was no, if units are bunched, they're destroyed type thing.
I guess just when the vehicle explodes.
Right. So yeah, that's true. So we started moving into things like the stratagems where a certain number of units are near each other, like the Necrons with their death rays from the Doom Donut things.
The Doom sides, yeah.
So they, it shoots and it hits everything in D6 inches and all that stuff. So now they have a pretty versatile, it looks like it can go on units of infantry or vehicles. It is the comms array bombardment, right? Mm-hmm. And it says that they can just hit things within D6 inches. And it works very similarly to the Necron thing where on a 4-up it hits the unit, and on a 5-up it can hit a character and it does D6 wounds. How do you feel about that?
It's D3 mortal wounds, not D6, which is a big deal. The reason the Necron one has so much play specifically, because there's actually the exact same stratagem in the Chaos Space Marines and regular Marines Codex for the 3D3 mortals. But the Necrons, it's on flyers. Flyers get line of sight to things a lot easier. They're more mobile. They're a little bit harder to kill. Where like the Vindicator stratagem, it's on Vindicators. Sure, they can move, advance, and do it, but they're low profile. Yeah, so they have to get line of sight. They're only hitting your front line. You can dictate a lot more. Now with the comms relay, it's only D3 mortal wounds, and it's in an area of effect. So it's not going to be one-shotting characters, even if they do roll the 5-up. That's the big thing with the Necron ability.
Because it's 3D3.
It's 3D3. Average dice, you kill a 6-wound character that doesn't have Feel No Pain. So D3 mortal wounds, so you roll a 5-up, and then at best you're dealing 3 wounds to my 4 or 5 wound character. That kind of sucked, and I've got to be careful, but you're going to be consistently dedicating to killing that character with this thing you built into your list.
Yeah.
And there's more efficient uses for what you have in your list.
That's true.
It's the way I see it. But it is true, you are getting more area of effect in the game, which affects primarily Tau would be the one I'd say it affects the most, wanting to castle up. But any army that wants to share buffs throughout the army is going to have some issue dealing with area of effect like this.
Yeah, them just adding it incrementally felt like a step back. So noticing it more and more felt bad, but I just didn't know if it was me noticing it more than others.
Yeah, and I would say if it was more consistently powerful, where it felt like we're just getting hit with barrages like 7th edition, I can agree. But just like people arguing about, well, 8th edition wasn't supposed to have Death Stars and we have these really hard to kill units. Right, but they take a lot more dedication to get to that point, and they're still, you can still get through them, I guess.
Yeah.
Lennon, you've got stuff you wanted to say.
Yeah, I think that may just be you noticing it more often. I mean, after all, the Necron Codex came out over a year ago, and the Doom Scythe stratagem really wasn't a hit until maybe 6 months ago. So I think that this is just things are being noticed more, rather than they weren't there before, now they're here. They were here before, they just weren't playing a large impact on the meta. I don't think it's bad for the game, though. I mean, the Necron Doom Scythe one is strong, but it's balanced out by the army that it's in, and the fact that you have to dedicate all 3 of your vehicles to do so, and killing one takes it away completely. So I don't think that area of effect mortal wounds are a problem necessarily, because it's something that you can play. You can play around it. You can spread out, you can keep all your vehicles and all your characters 6.1 inches away, and now the bombardment is hitting one thing. A once-a-game ability that might do a certain number of mortal wounds to one character and a squad. To me, that doesn't feel like it's OP, because it's contingent on dice rolls, it's random, people get Feel No Pains. A wounded character often functions just as well as a full health one. As long as he's not being shot, he can have 1 wound left or 10 wounds left, and it doesn't really matter. Guilliman's still giving Guilliman buffs.
Yeah, and a lot of characters do have the ability to heal or come back. Zinch has the ability to heal. Guilliman can just stand back up. Nurgle has a bunch of Feel No Pains. Necrons can stand back up. Even if you get through the character, it doesn't necessarily mean that character's gone. So,
Agreed.
And it's fairly matchup dependent, I suppose, as well, because there are a lot of armies that don't castle. There are just the few that rely on it.
Yeah,
So,
Yeah, of course.
yeah.
But one thing, and it's very much a surface observation I've made, but where the Space Marines are getting a bunch of offensive buffs and buffs to make the existing units more efficient, I kind of feel like they're going to play not unlike how the Necron army plays, where you have a lot of good tricks, a lot of good things, but at the end of the day, you still have 3-up armor with 25 models on the table plus some vehicles. Like, certain armies just can kill that.
Yeah.
So we'll obviously have to see the absolute strength and everything all combined, and that's not a bad thing because Necrons have been performing well in the meta, and if it's Space Marines, they have more allies, they have more things they can take, which will shore up those weaknesses. But at first glance, that's kind of the impression I get.
Yeah. My first impression of all these rules is that all these damage buffs are great that we're seeing on Ultramarines. Every Codex compliant chapter is getting a similar supplement, or all the founding ones, I should say. So I'm going to assume that everyone is getting cool rules like this. With that in mind, I actually really like Iron Hands the most, because I'm sure that some of the Marine units will go down in cost. I doubt that they're getting 30% points drop or anything crazy. Marines will still probably be a low model count army, more than 25, but they're never going to hit the 100 models, 150 models of Gene Circle Orcs. I like Iron Hands getting that little bit of extra damage reduction in there with their Feel No Pain. They also, more efficient Overwatch is nice, and more importantly, their vehicles always count as top tier. Marine vehicles are kind of durable, but they're not crazy durable. But something like a Dreadnought usually will take, concentrated effort to kill. It's not that hard to kill one to grade another. Functioning top tier is great. And also that 6-up Feel No Pain will now apply to vehicles. So their vehicles will be tougher. They'll fire more accurately while they're alive. Their squads will take a little bit longer to work through. Something like a Ravager going into an Ultramarine Primaris squad is going to cut through them like butter. Iron Hands, you make a 6-up here, 6-up there, you're taking 1 or 2 models that would be dead, and they're going to take an extra wound to kill. And I kind of like that. Also, Iron Hands are getting a new model, and honestly, he looks bitchin'. They posted a while ago, and they haven't previewed him yet, so we don't know anything about his rules, but he's a Primaris guy with an axe and a cool servo armor, and I love it.
Yeah, I mean, I won't argue with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, just to highlight some new units as well. I think you had mentioned the Infiltrator kit being a dual kit.
Yes.
And it looks like the other portion of that is an Incursor squad, is what it's called. Incursor squad? Yeah. Anyway, so he looks pretty cool. Little dude with some Robocop-looking eyes. But the other unit that I thought looked pretty cool, who knows about effectiveness, but the Invictor Tactical Warsuit, which it describes as a Redemptor Dreadnought that's been stripped back and redesigned with lighter, sound-dampening materials for use on covert operations. So basically a stealth suit that's going to be able to infiltrate, and it is a Dreadnought.
It's also a baby carriage.
Yeah, well, one thing that I wish that, Dreadnoughts are supposed to be basically the remnants of a Space Marine who can no longer fight otherwise. They basically put them in a coffin that fights for eternity, right? This model does not reflect that. That's a straight-up Marine inside of that thing.
Yeah, so...
I wish this dude was missing some pieces.
Yeah, that's what's weird to me is it's like, let's take a Dreadnought and take out the Dreadnought and then put in a Space Marine.
Like, put in a chassis and a little dude driving in it.
Well, I guess that's why they call it a warsuit, not a Dreadnought.
Yeah. It's the description that put me off. I'm sure that's probably not the actual lore, but...
Yeah, that's Warhammer.
Yeah. True.
It looks cool. I mean, obviously, we don't really know enough about it. I think they showed that it has a 6-shot autocannon, and then just looking at the model, it has another heavy bolter, and what appears to be 2 stubbers, but, you never know when they're going to say, oh, that's not a stubber. That's an Iron Hail Belisarius Call stubber. It's actually 12 shots, damage 4, You'll never know when it's going to look the same and get completely different rules because CW. So, if it is, 6-shot autocannon, heavy bolter, 2 heavy stubbers, that's a really good amount of shots. I mean, if it was the heavy stubbers, that would take it to 15 shots. That's respectable. If it's a lighter stealth dreadnought that's cheap, that could be very useful.
That sounds like to me something that would be in the 9 to 12 wound range, maybe a 4-up armor, but 110 to 130 points.
Yeah.
Something cheap and easy to bring 3 of, and they kind of work quickly across the table.
And they do have the Power Fist, and that means that you can infiltrate it. What, it has like the scout rule?
Yeah.
Similar, so you can infiltrate it 9 inches away from the enemy deployment zone. Well, if you go first, it's a dreadnought. It probably moves 8 inches or so. You're setting up a good turn 1 charge, making your opponent screen. And as we have discussed, Marines look like they're going to have a lot of anti-infantry options. You know, you've got your Primaris Marines moving up and still shooting with bolter drill, double tap, 4 shots with Vigilus detachment stuff. You can clear out guardsman screens real fast and then have those dreadnoughts charging into touch tanks.
Yeah.
I can see Marines definitely going back to that shock and awe where when a Marine army at full tilt hits you, you're just getting, blown off the table.
Yeah.
Like guardsmen would just evaporate to the firepower that they're previewing here. And then if they're immediately getting into combat on turn 1 with something like this infiltrating dreadnought, I can see where this would give a lot of people problems.
Absolutely. And with the loadout, it looks like on that dreadnought, he isn't going to be bad at removing light screens either. If he's got 15 or so anti-infantry shots, he can move up, shoot a screen out of his way. So like you have to deploy pretty far back from your screen. You can't be right up next to it because they can remove, that dreadnought alone can remove some of the screen and charge through it.
Yeah. It actually says it has 2 options as a primary weapon. The autocannon with 6 shots, and that is strength 7, AP 1, damage 2, or the incendium cannon, which is heavy 2d6 flamer, and that profile is 5, 1 AP with 1 damage. So even
it's 2 heavy flamers on 1 gun.
Yeah, so even a little better with an infantry clear, especially whenever you can drop right in front of their deployment zone.
Yep, definitely. Obviously, we're looking at incomplete pieces of a puzzle, but the components are there to make a very competitive army. We'll see if Games Workshop puts them together in the right, right format with the right points cost. But I think we'll see a lot of Marines in the future.
Yeah. I think with anything, it depends on these point costs. We're seeing a lot of leaked stuff, but they can overpoint something and destroy its potential immediately. So we'll see how it goes.
And the leaks, you never know when those are going to be accurate. The leaked Jane's Third Cult Codex was entirely incorrect. So we're going to ignore those for now and see what happens in the future. But I'm sure by next podcast, we'll have a much more clear picture of what's coming.
It's exciting to see that Warhammer 40k's flagship army may have some potential in the upcoming meta.
Absolutely.
No.
What do you mean, no?
He plays Gene Cult, that's why.
Well, what's interesting, too, is you have lots of veterans out there who have armies in the closet to dust off. You've got Space Marine armies that have been lying in wait for this moment.
Dark Angels especially in the closet. But I think that...
I wonder if the Dark Angels are going to come out of the closet anytime soon.
No, probably not. They're still not admitting Chaos Worship. But almost everyone has a Marine army, which means, and everyone bought a Dark Imperium box to get the rulebook when it came out. So everyone's got 20, 30 Primaris Marines on a sprue, 3-color painted, primed, whatever, sitting in a box somewhere. If Marine rules come out and they're good, this won't be like Gene Store Cult where it takes people a couple of months to get the right army together. If Marines come out and are good, people will buy the new kits and they'll be ready to go.
Yeah.
And you'll see Marines hitting top tables in a week.
Like a wrecking ball. It's just gonna...
if they have that kind of book, the jury's still out there, but if Marines are strong enough to shake up the meta, they'll do it immediately. Everyone has Marines.
Absolutely.
All right. Speaking of Marines, we want to launch into a conversation about a list that is perhaps not using the new codex, but still managed to find some success.
Absolutely. I think that is the perfect transition to our 5-minute meta.
5-minute meta.
5-minute meta. All right, so we're going to stick a little closer to home here. We're going to go over David Ozawa's list from the Super Secret GT. David Ozawa went 4-1 with a list that uses 3 different chapters of Marines in 3 different detachments. So no Codex Marines, but still he's using Blood Angels, Space Wolves, and Death Watch. So to start things off, the Death Watch detachment is a relatively simple battalion. He's got his Terminator Librarian, a Jump Pack Watchmaster, and 3 large bricks of Death Watch veterans. As you'd expect, he's got multiple Terminators, as many Storm Shields as he can, and he's got a bike thrown in there for a teleport homer just to make sure he can pull his squads around. Then he has a Space Wolf detachment. This is a Supreme Command. He has Najal Stormcaller and 2 Terminator Rune Priests, as well as a 10-man brick of Terminators with Stormbolter Storm Shield. The Stormbolter Storm Shield Terminator is surprisingly cheap, and that means I think it's 29 points a model.
27 points a model.
27 points a model.
It's 2 points per model cheaper than the Chaos Terminators, which don't have the Storm Shield. They have the Combi Bolter and a Chain Axe and cost more points than a Space Wolf Terminator with Storm Bolter, Storm Shield. And so you get 40 shots from this unit, just Bolter shots, but there's a stratagem where they can ignore modifiers to hit. I'm just throwing that in there because I played Plague Bearers.
Always worth mentioning.
But we'll come back.
Finally, he has a Spearhead detachment of Blood Angels. He has 2 Librarian Dreadnoughts and 3 units of 3 Eliminators. That's actually a unit we forgot to talk about in our buffs. Eliminators are going to Strength 5 and getting las cannons, so they're going to be there too. But for this list, for this weekend, what you look at here is a very eclectic mix of units. It definitely does not jump off the paper as being strong, like you're not really sure what you're supposed to be worrying about. But it's 4 10-man squads of all Terminator, of all Storm Shield Space Marines, all with Storm Bolters. They've got either Bolter Drill that can ignore negatives to hit, or Special Ammunition. You can get rerolls with the Watch Captain. And you can get 2-up saves very reliably by being in cover with the big squads of Death Watch, or just naturally in a 1-up save in cover for the Terminators. And then he has a lot of characters and the 3 Eliminator squads. Just about every single character we mentioned was a Psyker. He's got 2 Blood Angel Psychers, 3 Space Wolf Psychers, and a Death Watch Psycher. So 6 psychic powers. Between all of those different trees, he has access to a lot of Mortal Wound powers, in addition to just racking off a couple of smites. So he can kind of have a very tough wall with a lot of psychic characters behind it and a couple good melee units to jump out and punch you. Kind of similar to a Chaos list with like a Jim Vessel Horde where you've got your big durable bricks, your Demon Princes, your Armen. He kind of has the same thing, just loyal without spikes.
Yeah. But where it actually does better is obviously they have a ton of Stormbolter shots. So where Chaos, they don't really do any other damage. They have better psychic powers, more psychers, but they don't do any damage outside of the psychic phase. David's list absolutely can function, especially clearing infantry. So in the Tau matchup, he can shoot shield drones and set up for all the smites to hit characters or hit riptides, whatever, the following psychic phase. He has more ways of dictating. I'm not just going to kill the closest thing to me every turn. He can dictate and kill infantry, get early kills, get kills throughout the game. Now, one item that he has, and I really like the synergy, is he can use his shooting phase to bring a few units down to 3 or 4 wounds left in the unit. And the Living Lightning psychic power that the Space Wolves have, when you have all 3 Rune Priests together, which Najal is a named Rune Priest, I think it's like 1 or 2 command points, and the Living Lightning becomes D6 mortal wounds instead of D3. So you cast Living Lightning, you finish off a unit, and it bounces to the next unit, deals D6 mortal wounds there if you finish that unit off. So you can set up to bounce Living Lightning and deal D6 mortal wounds to multiple different units and get a ton of efficiency out of a relatively easy to cast psychic power. And that's just great.
Yeah, as long as he's got his Space Wolf Terminator, the Librarians alive, or the Rune Priest, he can use that stratagem for 1 command point every psychic phase. And he gets to cast the power and see if you deny it before he uses the stratagem, which is always nice. But I don't think there's actually a limit on how many units that can hit. It's just as soon as it doesn't kill a unit, it stops. But if you're talking like a Tau army with, 7 different 2-man shield drone units, a couple small wound characters, if he sets it up right where it hits a unit, then goes to closest to that unit, close to that unit, close to that unit, he can pinball mortal wounds all throughout the army. That's not going to happen every game, but a lot of people have never seen this kind of army. David kind of uses the unpopularity of the Space Marine armies to his advantage. I'm willing to bet, he won 4 games this weekend. I'm willing to bet a couple of those opponents walked up, read his list, and thought, oh, this is going to be easy. But David is a sneaky man.
Absolutely.
Maybe not in person, but on the tabletop, David is a sneaky man.
Very much so. And a big weakness that Deathwatch has is stuff like Null Zone or Death Hex removing your invulnerable save, and then you're just Marine armor. Well, when you suddenly have really good psychic support, you have really good psychic defense. So normally Mortal Wounds, Death Hex, stuff like that gets through his invulnerable saves. Well, when he's got 6 casters, a bunch of them have +1 to cast, he is suddenly interacting with his weaknesses and can really mitigate that. And if you don't have a way to deal with that 3-up invul, it becomes a freaking pain in the butt to get through.
Yep, absolutely. And also the Librarian Dreadnoughts. This list only has one battalion, but Librarian Dreadnoughts are like smash captains that aren't as reliable in that they could fail a power to not operate as well, but they really don't cost any command points. So as long as he can consistently pass a warp charge like 5 power, he doesn't have to spend the command points of a smash captain. And they're a little more durable, so yes, you get overwatched, but, it's just a Dreadnought. Stuff 7, 8 wounds, 3 up save. It's most likely not going to die. That gives him a lot of supplemental anti-tank and melee, and with the fly keyword with Wings of Sanguini, he can absolutely punch a hole in flyers, and they can't shoot him back because he's a character. So like a Crimson Hunter Exarch list has to shoot at Death Watch or Terminators with Storm Shields, really not doing that much damage, and in exchange he's mortal wounding one plane out of the sky and then charging a Dreadnought into the other and probably mauling it.
Yeah, and in games where you don't have to hit flyers, having Wings of Sanguinius is still really nice because getting fly is always useful, but really the only power you need in a lot of matchups is just the one that gives you additional attacks, because you've got like a power fist on a Dreadnought essentially is what your damage output is. So you're already going to be doing a lot of really good damage. It's just a matter of getting more attacks from a psychic power, being more efficient essentially. So it's not useless if the powers don't go off, but it is much better with the powers going off.
Yep, and we haven't talked about them yet, but what in my opinion is one of the best aspects of this list are the Eliminators. The Eliminators are the new Primaris Space Marine snipers. It's a 3-man unit. They've got their camo cloaks, their sniper rifles. They've got a couple different modes of ammunition. One of those doesn't need line of sight. Yeah, it's only damage 1, but it's still a sniper rifle. So you can put these little 3-man squads, very, very easy to hide. They have camo cloaks. They're tough to kill and cover. You can put those out of line of sight. He's got things to maneuver all of his different characters behind and not get shot. He is meanwhile shooting your characters, and you can't hide from them. Because if you're within 36 inches, then he's just going to shoot you. There's no line of sight that can save you at that point. So having access to those little units that are tough to dislodge, he can hide his characters behind them so that he doesn't have to use his big blobs, like he could deep strike them. And he's constantly picking away your support elements with them. That's very, very useful. We'll see them more often soon because they are getting buffed in the Space Marine Codex. But even right now, I think they're a fantastic unit that, even leading up to that Codex, I think they should absolutely be in most competitive Imperium lists if you have any kind of Space Marine attachment.
Yeah, and one last thing from me is, you said it right there, they have different modes of fire on the snipers. Well, Death Watch obviously also has different modes of fire. There's a lot of flexibility from game to game with this list, and that's a big part of winning in the competitive environment, is adapting based on your opponent. You can bring a take-all-comers list, and it doesn't have answers for everything. But when you have the ability to change your ammunition and your weapons, you get different efficiencies based on your opponent, and it makes it a lot easier going into a matchup and being confident that you have some answers for it.
Yeah, this is definitely an army that will reward an experienced player. You definitely could not pick up this list and take it to an RTT and expect to do well. But if you got a lot of practice games in with it, and you especially play in a high terrain environment, I think this could really reward a KG General. I think David's one loss of the weekend was to Andrew Ford, who's a top 20 player in the ITC and has 3 Cladius Grav tanks and a Night Crusader. And unfortunately for David, looking at that board, that one was a little bit light on terrain. Mm-hmm. It was a pretty even mix at the GT. That table just happened to be on the lighter edge. I think that's really what punished David, is that he went second without a lot of terrain and eventually just couldn't hide his units and got shot to death because he wasn't able to do enough damage early. That is always a threat with this list, but if you know that your meta is going to have that consistent terrain, having a different playstyle list like this will take a lot of people off guard and can really reward you.
Absolutely. All right, so with that, I believe is the conclusion of our 5-minute meta, and we started talking about it a little bit, the Super Secret GT, so we can just dive into that, give a quick 2-minute recap from myself, and a little bit more than 2 minutes if you want it, John, however long you want. It's your tournament now.
It is my tournament.
So, unfortunately, Jimmy did end up getting sick. I'm talking for him. He's right here. I don't know why.
I'm right here.
But he got sick. Unfortunately, couldn't make it. But there was still a waiting list, so his spot was filled. It wasn't a big deal, except for the sadness of not having Jimmy with us.
Yeah. Well, I got to preface this as well. My wife was sick for a week and a half before the event, like deathly ill, death's door for sure. Not really, but either way, I was drinking so much orange juice in emergency, managed to avoid it, but the very last day, it was Thursday, moving into Friday morning, I wake up with the sickness. So I messaged the TO and I was like, hey there, brother. Not able to make it. Made sure somebody was able to get in there. And the problem was, it was like the verge, where I was like, we got to make this drive tonight. And if I am sick tomorrow morning, the whole weekend's garbage. But if I don't wake up sick tomorrow morning and I missed, it's just going to ruin the whole weekend. So I woke up the next morning. I wasn't feeling as bad as I was expecting. So I ended up just building and painting that entire Tau army that we've been talking about for 2 weeks. So I'm ready for the next event with the Tau. Because I missed. Yeah, so that's my story. Other than that, I did not participate, so I'm done.
Yeah, I won't take very much time either. I went 2-2 and decided that Will and I needed to get home to our respective wives, so we left before the 5th round. All I want to say, I had great opponents all weekend. This is my 3rd GT. Well, ATC I didn't fight Andrew Ford, but the other 3 GTs I've been to, I fought Andrew Ford in every single one of them. He's a great opponent, great guy, really freaking tough, and my list was not as geared to grav tanks. Well, I can't say that. I fought Caladius grav tanks in 3 out of my 4 games. I fought 8 total Caladius grav tanks and 1 Telemon. So they're definitely very much present in the meta. I had a ton of fun though. I lost to Ford and I lost to a triple Knight Crest player with like a Valiant and Castigator. Pretty much, I'm playing a Chaos Horde and he was like anti-Chaos Horde. It didn't feel great. But I had a lot of fun, and with that, we will move into Mr. John Lennon.
Alright, so spoiler alert from the top, I did end up going 5-0 this weekend and winning the Super Secret GT, which we're now allowed to talk about. Not too much to say. I covered my list last week. It's nigh identical to my ATC list. I did have 5 great games, 5 great opponents. I would love to play any of them again. I'm not going to go into game-by-game recaps because you guys probably don't want to hear me say Aberrants killed X unit 5 times in a row. Just want to pass my compliments on to Mr. Carter Leach. He was my round 5 opponent. We had a very good game there. This is definitely my closest of the weekend. It was the only one where I really felt threatened, where I was kind of worried on turn 5 that I wasn't going to be able to pull it out. Fortunately, I hit a reroll with a command point. I needed to roll a 3 up, and I hit a 5. And that got an Aberrant unit into close combat, and that pretty much secured the win for me. Yeah, so what I will talk about a little bit is kind of some of the lessons learned with Genestealer Cult. I did take a couple weeks off between ATC and this tournament where I didn't play Genestealer Cult. I kind of messed around with an Imperium list just to get some variety in there. Taking a break from Genestealer Cult is hard because you kind of have to play that army perfectly, otherwise you lose all your units immediately. Definitely made some mistakes that I shouldn't have, and I think what that means is going into Nova, I am only going to play Genestealer Cult because I don't think I can afford to make mistakes like that at Nova. So with that in mind, like just some things I did, I didn't necessarily do a great job screening out my characters. Definitely I could have been more thorough. If you're going to put your character anywhere near a building, put a model on the top, on the level of that building so that they can't put a flyer hanging over to shoot you. If they ever shoot at a Patriarch, always put it on the Familiar first. I tried to get cute and take invulns on him, and then when I failed one, I couldn't pass it to the Familiar because it doesn't have an invuln, so all the wounds went on the Patriarch. Familiar lived, Patriarch died. If I'd done it in the other order, Patriarch lives with 2 wounds left, and I still have a Patriarch. So just need to be a little more secure in my fundamentals, keep protecting my characters, keep those Patriarchs alive, and measure my distance. That charge I mentioned against Carter Leach where I command pointed it to make it, I was 6.5 inches away from my Clamavus, and I easily could have been in range of the Clamavus. If I roll a 1 or a 2 on that reroll and I fail that charge, suddenly the Clamavus not being there bites me in the butt because I made the charge with him, failed it without him, and used the reroll. So just need to short my fundamentals a little bit there, and I think I'll be ready to go from Nova.
Yeah, and that anytime you're playing a high skill cap army like that, it does all come down to practice. Like, I could take the exact same list that John has won multiple GTs with. Well, the list has evolved and changed. Mm-hmm. But I could take any one of those lists, and I'll be lucky to go positive with it because it is such a delicate balance of fragile units, high damage output, movement shenanigans, and reserve manipulation. But if you misstep, like, you have all of these tricks, but what that means is if you misstep with any one of these tricks, it leaves you open, and if your opponent takes advantage of that, the game's over. And
Yeah.
so fortunately, when you did make those mistakes, it's obviously they weren't taken advantage of, or if they were, it wasn't enough to just completely throw you off because you still went 5-0-1. But
Yeah, no, Carter did a good job of taking advantage of some of my mistakes. Fortunately, I was able to wrestle it back from him, just mostly by going for the bonus objective. But definitely kind of surprised me that I made some of those mistakes, because that's a little bit of arrogance on my part. But I thought, oh, I've played this army perfectly before. I don't need to practice it anymore. I will continue to play it perfectly. That is not the case. When you have the autopilot of Caladius, Grav Tanks, and Knights, you go back to it, and it is a little bit different. So I think that's a lesson for me, that I should not take anything for granted. And I'm just going to keep grinding Gene Stewart Cult until at least through Nova, and then we'll see what the Marine book brings and see where I go from there.
I think what you have said as far as your recap kind of leads into our next point here, because in you saying that you learned several things from these matches, you say you're 5-0, you beat every opponent you went against, but there were still mistakes that you made that you learned from. I feel like in most games, people don't learn from something unless it stomps them into the dirt. And that comes from a certain mindset where you're constantly not just reviewing your losses, but you're reviewing your wins in a way that makes you a better player. So what do you think is a mindset of a winner? I'd say moving into a tournament and during a tournament that helps you win the game.
Okay, so I'm going to break this down into two stages. So playing to win, being competitive, deciding that you are going to go be the best player that you can. I think there are two stages to this. The first one is not before a tournament. It's just it's a point where you reach where you kind of have to ask yourself, is this what I want to do? So this could be, you could be an RTT player, you could be a casual player. At some point, if you actually want to go compete in tournaments and have an expectation to win, you need to kind of look in the mirror and say, is this something I want to do? And if the answer is yes, you can't accept any substitutes. That doesn't mean you can't enjoy casual games. It doesn't mean that you can't play Apocalypse, you can't play Kill Team, you can't play for fun sometimes. But when you are going to a tournament to try to win, you have to go to try to win. A lot of the times I see people like the 3-1, the 4-1 players, the people who, lose a game and finish in third place, say, oh, I could have done this to make my list better, but I didn't because I like X model. I don't think you can have that mindset and truly be a competitive player. For example, I'm playing my Gene Stewart Cult. I played my Forearmed Emperor for a while. I didn't bring Twisted Helix because I wanted to play Cult of the Forearmed Emperor. That was the first cult. That's how I painted them. That's how I wanted the army to run. That's the wrong decision. I've playtested both. Twisted Helix is, objectively based on my results, is more competitive. I should not make any other decision. Likewise, you may know that bringing 3 Caladius Grav Tanks is more competitive than bringing 2 Caladius Grav Tanks or bringing no Caladius Grav Tanks. You should not, if you want to be competitive, you shouldn't say, oh, I'm just going to bring my Redemptor Dreadnought. I know it's not as competitive, but, it's more fun. You kind of have to take those, separately. You can't say these models are fun, therefore I'll bring them and try to be competitive with them. If you want to do that, there's absolutely no problem with that. Just don't tell yourself that you are then going to win the tournament and be disappointed when you're not. There's nothing wrong with loving your Space Marines, loving your Redemptor Dreadnoughts, taking them to a tournament and having a great time. I've done tournaments with models I love like that, like Carnifexes. But if you do that, you have to look at the reasons why you don't win the tournament, unless you're better than I am and win the tournament with the Redemptor Dreadnoughts. At that point, it's because of the decisions you made leading up to it. Every decision you make is either one that leads you closer to winning the tournament, or is one that didn't. And you can be a perfectly competitive player and still not win the tournament. You could just hit a bad matchup with the most competitive list you have access to, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. And being a competitive player doesn't mean you have to win the event. It just means that you have to accept that every decision you make going into a tournament needs to make it closer to victory.
Yeah, and another thing to follow up, because I completely agree, is kind of like take responsibility for your wins and losses. And that's something a lot of people, I think, have trouble with is, oh, well, the dice did this, or, well, if I would have gone first in this game, or, well, I don't want to hear the wells if your ultimate goal is to win. What can you do at any given time with the board state as it is? So there is that, again, be responsible for what you do on the table. Don't blame anything else. You could have 1,000 points and your opponent has 2,000 points. Well, how are you going to win this game in that situation? That's what you have to be thinking of. Don't think, oh, well, I'm at a disadvantage. I'm at this. I'm at that. Because honestly, none of that matters. Like I've played games and won where my entire player screen just gets wiped out immediately, and I'm like, well, what do I do? How do I overcome this? You have to use terrain. You have to use anything and everything that you can. While still being a good sport, that's a very key part of being a competitive player, in my opinion, is you still have to be polite at the table. You have to play your opponent well and be a good opponent, but use everything at your disposal to still do what you can to win this game. Don't just get down because something didn't go your way and, oh, well, I can blame this. Well, blaming something doesn't get you better at the game.
Yeah, I will say, kind of as an addendum to what I said before, every decision you make should be one leading you closer to victory. That does not mean, that doesn't mean you should be a jerk to your opponent. I mean every decision related to the game state. Every move, every, target priority, every list building decision, everything like that, relic spot pregame, that should all be what leads you closest to victory. That does not mean that you should walk up to the table, mean mug your opponent, and tell his wife that you're going to kick him in the balls. That is not what that means. Not only does that, in my opinion, not intimidating your opponent, in my opinion, does not at all help you win the game. If they're the kind of person that's going to play poorly because they're intimidated, then who wants to take advantage of that and still feel good about themselves? Two, that may not be a game that you need help winning. With that in mind, I actually think it's damaging because a lot of what I attribute my personal success in tournaments to is what happens in between the tournaments. It's the people I talk to. It's, people I collaborate with, people I play practice games with. If I am a jerk when I walk up to the tournament table, I don't get practice games on the weekdays. I don't get to test out my lists. I don't get to talk to players who are better than me and pick their brains, get their advice. If you have a reputation for being a jerk, you won't get that, and that will then be a detriment to your theoretical success. Now, you should just be nice for the sake of being nice because, that's a good thing to do. Being good is good. But still, if that's not enough for you, I think it'll actively hurt your chances of winning if you have a reputation for being a jerk like that.
Absolutely. And that ties into another key factor for me in competitive games is you have a rule set, do everything you can in the rule set that the rules permit. So you're allowed to soup armies, you're allowed to bring your Ultramarines with your Dark Angels, you can do all this different type of stuff as long as the rules permit. Well, part of the rules of Warhammer is kind of the unwritten social contract. When you come to a table, there's a certain expectation for this game to be fun. It's a game. We're playing a game. So that's one thing to ultimately remember. And so essentially, part of the rules of the game is to have fun with your opponent, be a good person, and have a positive interaction. And when that doesn't happen, it shows. It ends up all over Facebook. You have your apology tours where you record a 10-minute video in a truck or you do whatever. But essentially, that's a huge part of competitive gaming, again, is just developing a social contract with the people that you're playing with and against. Which that's something we can even go into more in depth in future episodes. But that's something that I hold very, very close.
Yeah, and I want to harp real quickly on one thing you mentioned there. The, soup is allowed in the rules of the game. That's what you should focus on. Don't focus on, Games Workshop wants us to play pure. The rules allow you to do something, you should do it. That doesn't mean you should bend the rules, try to find loopholes, but if the rules allow you to do it, and you talk to a TO and the TO agrees, yes, the rules allow you to do this, do it. If you want to play, if you want to go win LVO, and you're a Grey Knights player, don't play Grey Knights just because you want to play Grey Knights. If you acknowledge that they are not the most competitive option, maybe you're better than me, and you have found a way to make Grey Knights win LVO. Fantastic, good luck. But if you know this is not the most competitive option, do not bring it and then be mad when it does not lead the most competitive results. Does not yield more competitive results. So if you want to take your pure Space Marines and you know that it's better with the Loyal 32 attached, don't be mad when pure Space Marines goes 2-1, 4-1, and complain, because that is a decision that you made leading into the game. And when you make that decision, you have to accept the ramifications. But if you want to make the most competitive list you can, the Caladius Grav tanks with the Knight Crusader with the Loyal 32 with 10 commanders, and you, at that point, you've set yourself up as well as you can. Now you have to execute on the tabletop. That's kind of part 2 of the competitive mindset. But part 1 is everything you do before you show up to the tournament. You have to actually commit to success, you know. And another thing, let's talk about it. Net listing. No one cares who wrote the list, really.
Yeah. Well, scrubs care, and
and
you shouldn't worry if your goal is to be a competitive wargamer and win events. Then you shouldn't really worry what scrubs are saying and complaining about. Yeah. They're going to do that. Okay.
I think one thing though, in order to use the term scrubs, we need to define what it means, because otherwise it seems like a derogatory term. Scrub is something very specific.
It is derogatory, though. I absolutely say that in a very derogatory term.
But in the competitive scene, scrub means something that is specific enough to be an identifier, not a derogatory term.
Okay.
Do you want to go ahead and explain what that is?
So, I guess the best way to define a scrub is someone who is, in my opinion, a scrub is anyone who limits what they're willing to do, or who complains about what other people do instead of improving themselves. So, for example, if you lose to someone playing with Leviathan Dreadnought, and you don't say, oh yeah, I could have made different decisions, you say, oh, I lost because he used Forge World, and Forge World is OP, you're a scrub. If you say, oh, I brought pure Space Marines, but he brought a soup army, even though he outscored me, I'm better than him because I had a pure army, you're a scrub. Anyone who puts a non-existent rule into the game to make themselves look better, to complain about what their opponent does, who doesn't, you know, I always think of scrubs as kind of annoying personally. I guess they don't have to be, but in my opinion, anyone who takes the competitive aspect of the game and then puts the uncompetitive aspects into it is a scrub. If someone is a casual player, they like to play on Tuesday nights in the local league, and they know what they're doing and they don't complain if they lose to Brandon Grant's LVO list, that's not a scrub to me. That's, you know, if you know what you are and you're happy with it and you have a good time, there's nothing wrong with that. That's great. But if you then take your glittery painted Ultramarines to a grand tournament, lose to someone who's using Eldar, and complain that you're better than them, you just had Space Marines and they had Eldar, then you're a scrub.
Yeah. And I would say 2 points to that as a newer player. One to an older point that we were covering a little bit ago. But when you're entering the competitive scene for the first time, it seems weird as a person coming out of a local community to play things that are just the best. Because you'll have a lot of people around you, your local gamers who are also casual, telling you that playing that net list is a bad decision. It's going to make you look a certain way, or it's trying too hard. And coming into a competitive meta, you got to realize that that's the choice that everyone makes. You're not the only one going to that GT that's going to be playing a list that they saw online because it's really good. You need to choose the tools that you have available to you that are the best to allow you to win. And those are the choices you make, not just during the game, but before the game. John's talking about choices that you make during the game that win that game, and looking back on those choices and realizing what was good and what was bad. List construction, probably 50, if not more, of a percentage of that. Knowing what you're going to be facing on that table and bringing the tools to beat it. A lot of that stuff is what you're going to find the best players playing. So look at that and see what you can learn from it. The other thing is, this community is huge. Warhammer is huge. That's one of the reasons I chose this game as the game that I wanted to play competitively, because there are so many people playing it locally and nationally, and the reputation that you gain as a player spreads very quickly. So if you're a person that plays in a certain way, you're a salty player or you're a good player, that's the thing that somebody you've never even seen before might already know about you before you get there. Because you've played against a teammate, you played against somebody in Georgia, now you're playing against somebody in North Carolina, but they know you because you played against their friend. Like, you need to think about that every time before you move your models in a way that you know is deceitful, or play your game in a way that you know isn't, like, fair. I've seen some people who, I don't know, that's changed the way that I play my game, in the way that I present what I do, to make sure that whatever I do can't be misconstrued as a gotcha move or something like that, because I want to make sure that my reputation stands as a player as I try to move into the competitive community, because stuff like that gets online.
Yeah, and that goes back to what I was talking about a little earlier with the social contract, is every game I open, if I haven't played you before, if I have, we've had this talk, but basically I explain, if it's not completely flat, reroll the dice, and declare intent. Those are the two big things. You want to remove question from the game, because when there's questionable moments, that's when you get into an argument. So I always re-roll if it's not flat, because then, like, if I need a 6 on this roll and, oh, it's a 6, is that cocked or not? There's going to be a bias based on if I'm looking at it or my opponent. So if we've already agreed, well, yes, that's cocked because it's not completely flat. It takes that feel-bad moment out of the game. The other is declaring intent, pre-measuring. If I move a model, I immediately measure, okay, I'm 6 inches away, I'll need to make a 5-inch charge because I'm within the 6-inch arc. So if something happens, a terrain piece gets bumped or something happens, and now we're 8 inches away all of a sudden, well, how did that happen? Well, we already spoke, we had the agreement, the social contract that, yes, I am 6 inches away, this will be a 6-inch charge. And my opponent, most of the time, will pick up on that very quickly. They'll declare their intent to me as they're in the movement phase, setting up for all the other phases. That removes those gotcha moments. It removes the feel bads, and it lets you focus on playing more freely. When you play more freely, you play a better overall game. And I would rather, when I win a game, I want to know that I played my best and I played against my opponent at their best. I don't want to win a game where I maybe played well, my opponent made a couple mistakes, I was like, no, sorry, you can't go back. Was that a win, or did my opponent just make a mental mistake and here we are? Now, that's not to say you should tell your opponent how to beat you. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that when you want to play a good competitive game and develop a good relationship and a good reputation with the community, being a little bit lenient makes you a better player and makes the community around you respect you and makes everybody a better player.
Yeah. And one other point, just to finish off my point there, what you brought up about forgetting certain things and your opponent forgetting things and how you should respond to that. I was more used to playing computer games before I started moving into this realm of gaming, and I treat tabletop game as though it's a computer game. So say I were playing something like, you know, a turn-based strategy, and that other player is on the internet somewhere. The game itself would force that player to do whatever actions they were obligated to do. So it would be like, hey, here's your psychic phase. If somebody moves straight from their movement phase to their shooting phase, and they did have a psychic phase they should have had, I will remind them of that. And be like, hey, you literally just skipped your psychic phase because you're getting a bit too excited. Some players will be like, you just declared shooting, you're done. None of that. Mm-hmm. So I like to make sure that if there is something that a player should have gotten, then I will give it to them. If somebody has moved something and then they're like, oh, I should have moved them here instead, at that point it's a discussion that should be had based on what you would like to decide to do. But what I like to do is make sure that the opponent has whatever obligatory actions that they would normally have, so that I'm not beating them based on, oh, you forgot something. It's like, did you actually out-strategize that person to the fullest of their capability? Or did you just take advantage of the moments where they forgot something in that last moment before they declared the first part of a shooting action? So.
Yeah, and obviously, like, if they've rolled 6 shooting attacks and killed a bunch of models, it could be a little different.
It could start to change things.
But when if they just declare something and forgot to declare something else, it's not a big deal.
Yeah, basically just be friendly.
Yeah. I mean, that's a wonderful soapbox on sportsmanship. I'm going to reel it a little bit back into competitive talk. The second part of the mindset, in my opinion, is both during the game and after the game. And You mentioned not blaming dice. That's definitely a big part of it. You want to break down everything. Because sometimes you're a dice roll away from losing or winning, and yeah, you won. That doesn't mean you didn't make mistakes, kind of like I was talking about earlier. You need to look at every decision you made and ask yourself if it was the most important one. It's, we could take hours to talk about this, like the difference between tactics and strategy, how you could execute what you want to do perfectly, like perfectly executing a tri-point, perfect target priority, but maybe your overall game strategy was bad. Maybe you should have run away instead of being in range to shoot at all. I'm not going to talk too much about that because that's something you kind of learn by experience. The big thing is to go get experience. Go play, and you may decide I'm going to be the best competitive player I can. You make all the right decisions, you talk to people, you get a list going, you're ready to go, you go to a tournament, you go 2-3. That doesn't mean that the process is bad. It means that you may not have experience with the second part, where if this is your first tournament with a list, you shouldn't expect to do well. You should go to a couple RTTs first, maybe go to a GT before you go to that major. Go get experience, and most importantly, get involved with the community. Go find people to practice against, iron sharpens iron. Go find good players to play against, people to test your strategy, test your decision-making skills, and then go look at it later. Never look at dice. I have what I call like the Uncle Rico moment, where you get to talk about what could have been or what should have been for the rest of the day, and after that moment, you can't complain. I don't care if you failed a 2-inch rerollable charge where you rolled snake eyes and then more snake eyes. You can complain about that at dinner that night at Applebee's with your friends. That's fine. It's a game. That's part of the social construct, is complaining, and it's fun, honestly. But once you get past that point, the weekend's over, when you're at work Monday and you're thinking about your games, think about, okay, how could I have screened so that I could still recover from failing a 2-inch charge? I lost a game because I failed a 3-inch charge against Andrew Ford at the Dallas Open. Obviously, if I roll anything other than 1-1 into 1-2, yeah, I would probably do a lot better in that game. However, that was something I could have failed, and I assumed I was going to make it. And I did not plan the rest of that turn from, the rest of my movement, my psychic, my shooting, into my charge phase. I planned on making that charge, and I assumed it was impossible that I fail it. I failed the charge, I lost the game. What decisions could I have made? All of the characters behind that unit that I thought was going to make a charge and get a tri-point, all of those were on the bottom floor, and then they got charged by a knight after the knight shot away the screen. I could have easily put all 6 of those characters on the second level of a ruin. They still would have given the same buffs. I still had that same very likeliness to make the charge, and the game would have gone the same way if I had made the charge. Or I could have put a unit of guardsmen in between the two, so that I had a second screen after he shot away the first one, instead of him shooting 2 characters and charging the other 3. I could have made other decisions to set myself up better in case of failure. If it's not a mathematical, guarantee, if I'm not 1 inch away where I know that I physically cannot fail that charge, pending Tangle Flick grenades, don't count on it. And sometimes you have to take a risk, where I have looked at the game state and I have said, okay, if I pass this psychic power, I win the game. If I fail this psychic power, I lose the game. Sometimes I have to make that decision, and I'm willing to take that risk. If I fail that risk, don't look at, if only I'd rolled a 7 on those dice. You have to look back and say, what decisions led to that point in the game? Why did I need to make that? I have a psychic power to advance and charge. If I fail that, I've already advanced. I'm not charged with the aberrants are in the middle. Could I have moved the aberrants up a turn before? Could I have kept them in deep strike and used perfect ambush instead? What decisions could I have made earlier in the game to avoid that situation? Never blame the dice when you're actually reviewing how you did in a game and what your decisions were.
I actually have a great example of that because when I fought against the Triple Knight player, I charged into a Castigator with my Khorne Demon Prince with the Murder Axe and a Tzeentch Demon Prince with full buffs from Psychic Powers. So, okay, I'm going into it thinking if my Murder Prince doesn't kill it, it's going to be degraded all the way. Maybe he interrupts and kills my Tzeentch Prince. Probably not at that point because he's going to be hitting me on like 4s or 5s. And it's just, I've got a 4-up invulnerable save. So, of course, my Murder Prince, I hit 6 times, I wound 6 times. No 6s for mortal wounds. He makes 4 saves because he has Sanctuary on him. And then I roll Snake Eyes on my 2 damage rolls. Reroll 1, still got a 1. So I did a total of 2 wounds. So, of course, I'm looking at that and I'm like, really? That's what just happened? What I should have done, if I think about it and set myself up better, I could have moved the Contorted Epitome to hold the Castigator in place, charged his Valiant, which was locked in combat, because a Valiant just isn't as good in melee. So if I charge that, even if I don't kill that knight, the other one's not falling back, unless he rolls under his leadership. But I can hold the Castigator in place. I can do more reliable damage to the Valiant because he doesn't have Sanctuary on it. If it does survive, it's not going to deal nearly as much damage back, and then I've eliminated one of his assets, and then I can focus on the Castigator. So when I think back, the decision I made was the wrong decision. The results on average dice most of the time, it should have been fine. I should have done a ton of damage to it. Even if I don't kill it, I finish off with smites, no big deal. But ultimately, it was the wrong decision regardless of what the result was. And it just happened the result was skewed really badly.
Yeah. And we're playing a strategy game that's based around dice. So if you're going into a game saying, I'm going to be competitive, I'm going to be the best player I can be, part of that is going to be strategizing around the dice, because you're playing a strategy game that is based on dice. I am a player who I now try to make a point of not mentioning dice during any given game. Afterward, I will complain, just like John has mentioned, dinner at Applebee's. But I try not to mention the dice during the game, because it gives me a mindset that ruins my next turn. If I'm like, oh, I failed that charge, that's going to lose me the game. It's probably going to lose me my game just because I told myself that. But I have seen John go into games. I've been watching a turn 4 when he has barely any units left on the board. There's no way he is going to win this game. And somehow...
Hold on. Part of that is he's also down by like 8 points.
Yeah, and then somehow we find out later, oh, John won that game and the whole tournament. It's like, how in God's name? So that is why I appreciate John's opinion so much, especially on this matter, the mindset of a winner, because your mindset changes that game so much, especially in the trenches of turn 4, when you're saying, oh man, there's no way I could catch up, and I just had some really bad rolls. If you planned up to that in turns 1, 2, and 3, and continue to hold that mindset in turns 5 and 6, you can pull it out, because it's a strategy game based around dice. You got to strategize around the dice.
And turn 6 is as important, if not more important, than turn 1. So don't let what happens on turn 1 negatively impact you all the way through turn 6.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of the above.
Yeah. We've actually gone a little over an hour this time.
Nope, there's one other thing we got to cover. Let's cap it off with a little casual convo.
Right.
So
cap it off then.
Having finished the tournament this weekend, I would like to say an opinion piece of each of us. What is your opinion of the best and worst part of the tournament scene that you have experienced? Not like as a general statement of like, oh, this one time this happened, but I mean like in the world of Warhammer 40k, a player who is, new or veteran, what would you say is the part that you enjoy the most or the part that you dislike the most?
Okay, so I'll start off. My absolute favorite part of tournaments is meeting new people. Yes, I'm competitive. Yes, I love that. I love winning, and I put a lot of effort into trying to do so. My favorite part is meeting new people, seeing people that I have met at tournaments before, traveling. I enjoy going to local tournaments where it doesn't matter if I win or lose, it won't affect my TC score. I don't really need store credit because I get to hang out with my friends. I enjoy going to new events, meeting new people. I like going to LVO, saying hi to Nick Nanavati, Colin Sherman, people who I have already met, established good relationships with, and want to hang out with again. As much as I love the game, and my favorite in-game part is probably getting into a really close game with a skilled player where we're both having fun, we're both respecting each other, but it's close and we're both doing everything we can to pull out that last couple points to get a win. So 2 parts kind of, but those are my favorites. My least favorite part of tournaments, the part I dread the most, is the time between check-in and round 1. I get butterflies major for tournaments. I play through them. It could be an RTT a week after I went top 8 at BAO, and I can look around and see nothing but sparkly Ultramarines, and I'm still nervous before round 1 when I see the pairings. It's just for me, I mean, I like winning. I don't like losing. I put a lot of effort into not losing. I am always constantly thinking about losing. Every game, I can be up 10 points going into turn 6, and I'm still thinking, oh god, how could I lose this? How could you win this game? And then I try to step on his fingers as he tries to claw back.
Yeah.
For me, it's just, it's that moment before round 1 where I'm checked in, my army's set up, my lists are outnumbered, I'm ready to go, and I'm just kind of staring over the edge of the cliff waiting for it to happen.
Yep. Yeah, so I'll transition with my negative because it's similar to yours. I hate the travel to an event because that's when I get nervous. I start thinking about, well, this person's going to be here, this person's going to be here. What if I run into this list? What's my plan for this? How do I do this? Crap, did I leave this model at home? I haven't yet, but I always feel like I have. So for me, it's not between check-in and round 1. I'm so apathetic at that point. Like, I don't care anymore.
You're already dead inside?
I'm already dead inside. I've already lost the first game. It's literally the travel to the event. It's like, man, it would be so much easier to just be home. But I power through that. I get to the hotel. I'm hanging out. And this is what leads into my favorite part is I love the community. I love the group of guys that we have. Not too long ago, it was like me and Will and a couple other people, and now we have over 100 people that I'm sure I could message in Brohammer and not in Brohammer, but there's just a ton of people I could message on any given day, be like, hey, I've got this list idea, let's talk about it, and they'll talk to me about it. So seeing those people at events, like John was saying, relationships you've developed, both in your gaming group and outside of it, getting to travel with these guys, hang out, grab a beer. I don't like Applebee's, so I'm not going to use that one, but like Chili's. Going to Chili's and complaining about your games afterwards, drinking a beer, hanging out with the guys. That's absolutely my favorite part of tournaments. And then just a little throw in because I love it. I also enjoy trading. The whole wheeling and dealing is great, and that might be a teaser for things to come in the future.
Yeah. Well, I'm awful at trading.
Yes,
absolutely
you are.
Awful.
You are
I'm just
bad.
like, guy, do you want this for 40% towards your full retail price? Is that what you? I'll throw you $3,000 for your $600. Just take it, please. So either way, so I would say my least favorite. Let's start with my favorite. My favorite part of the tournament scene is the travel itself. I've traveled out of Florida more times in this past year than I had otherwise in my entire lifetime, which is unusual. Like, went to Texas, Georgia, North Carolina.
Don't forget Alabama and Mississippi.
Alabama. When did we go to Mississippi?
We went to Biloxi. No, you weren't in that one.
Tennessee, right?
Yeah, we went to Tennessee.
Yeah, so
North Carolina.
Honestly, that is more times than literally the rest of my entire life has been in the past 9 months because of Warhammer. I must say that because of work constraints, it's literally driving up Friday afternoon, getting to bed by 2 or 3 a.m., and then waking up by 7 a.m. to get to the tournament by 8, and playing through the weekend until we finally leave 5 o'clock Sunday afternoon, so I don't actually see any part of where we have traveled to. But there's something exciting about being like, hey, I'm going to Alabama this weekend to play in a tournament that's, a national tournament. That's pretty fantastic. It gives you a cool sense of purpose when you're dedicating that much time and energy to doing something you enjoy. I would say the least favorite part is that anxiety, but I would say I have certain roots to that anxiety. I don't know why, because I don't go into a tournament with the expectation to win necessarily. I know I'm a newer player and I'm really just trying to learn. I'm still facing a lot of things that I've never even seen before. But it's almost that reputation thing that we talked about earlier. Having a reputation of being a winner or a loser is also a thing. And me moving into a tournament with the Caladius list and a knight, that is a high runner list somebody should be able to win with. When I still go 3-2 or 2-3, it feels bad. And I feel like that is what causes those butterflies. It is true that I feel a lot better once the deployment zone dice are being rolled and you know exactly where everything is playing out, because then you can form a strategy. But before that, it's like, who am I going to play against? I wonder what deployment zone we're going to have. What mission is this? All of those pieces cause so much anxiety in me. And I say that that is the most annoying part. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Otherwise.
So one I don't know. Most people that are listening to this probably don't like football or sports ball that much.
Sports
But
ball.
for me, when I played football, I was always nervous until the first hit. So I was on like kickoff and kick return. So it was the first play of the game. I would be super nervous until you hit or get hit, and then you mentally, like, the switch fires, and you go from nervousness and everything to what you've been practicing. This is what you're prepared for. So just like in Warhammer, once you have a deployment zone, you start strategizing. You forget about everything else. You forget about, well, what am I going to do round 2? What if I have to fight John Lennon round 3, or I'm dealing with Jim Vessel top table. Well, you have to get to that scenario first, and that's when you are rolling your first die, the first turn of the first game. Forget about everything else, because you have to get through this to get to that point.
Yeah, I agree. Well, with that, I believe that we're at a closing point. I'm glad we were able to get that more casual conversation out there a bit. Is there anything else we want to touch on before next week? Maybe a taster of next week?
We might have promised this last week and then failed to deliver. Next week, we are going to talk about transitioning from the ITC to Nova format. Promise.
All right.
Because
you got to do it.
I have to do that now.
Yeah.
So that is what we are talking about next week, and hopefully it'll be useful.
Yeah.
Right.
And maybe we can throw some shade at some tournaments coming up, and
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Oh, nothing happening in Atlanta here, boys. Nothing happening here.
Oh.
On that note, thank you so very much for listening to us. Please comment below any feedback, dislikes, likes, anything you have to say. We want to hear it. Please like us on Facebook, FloridaMan40k podcast. Please like us on YouTube. Please share us with your friends if you thought we were entertaining. Just let us know, and if not, throw shade at us. We want to, this is episode 3. By episode 5, we officially have to have our stuff together. But until then, we're amateurs.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Building it as we go.
But soon we'll be pro, which means we can charge $200 to listen. All right, guys. Thank you so very much, and have a good night.
See ya.
Bye.